There we go. Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Michelle Fanninsteel, and welcome to Dirigo Food Safety's office hours. Um, I don't know, it's like Tuesday afternoon, September 11th. So thank you for joining me today. I know September 11th can be pretty hard for some people. I lost a college classmate in the on September 11th, and I miss her. And her name was Rama Sally. She was awesome, and we miss her a lot. And I know a lot of people sacrificed. I joined the service after September 11th, and I was actually posted to Fort Monmouth in New Jersey, and I was the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey veterinarian, and I treated dogs that worked on the pile. So the Port Authority police had dogs that worked on the pile, and those dogs needed shots and veterinary care and all that sort of thing. And those were all my dogs while I was posted at Fort Monmouth. And so it was a great honor of my life to work with those law enforcement officers and their canines. And so anyway, so that is on our minds today for September 11th. And so with all that respect in our hearts and love in our hearts for the people who lost their lives that day, I'm still coming here on for office hours because it's super important about how we go about our lives. I feel that pretty deeply as a former officer, and so let's jump on to it. So I've gotten a couple of calls over the past couple of weeks on things that are going on out there in the universe, and I wanted to address some of the questions that I've got. Of course, this is a live and open Q&A session. And it's I'm doing them to provide timely topical help to folks about issues that are going on out in the universe, things that are going on. So there are a couple things to note. I noted them in the what's it called, in the blurb for this. I want to go over tomatoes. There was a new industry recommendation guide published around tomatoes. If you want it, I have a PDF copy of it, and I'm happy to send it to you. Then I want to talk about the difference between FDA and USDA and that sort of thing. We've covered that several times here, but I think it bears repeating because I've had a couple more questions over the past weeks about what's the difference, what's dual jurisdiction, and what does that mean? And then finally, I want to wrap up the call, and we'll wrap up by the bottom of the hour on what we mean by the burden of inspection. So by all means, feel free to type in questions. This is an open office hours call, so I'd love to hear from you. But don't worry, I have questions that people queue up. So, so the first thing that I want to talk about is that there was a industry-specific guidance on tomatoes that was sent out by United Fresh Produce, and United Fresh Produce they worked with a whole bunch of people with the words PhD after their name to talk about tomato produce and produce safety. And this is super important for many of my clients because they get tomatoes in, and when you get tomatoes in and you're going to be using tomatoes in production, we have to think about kill steps because tomatoes carry Shigatoxin E. coli, and they carry salmonella and that sort of things if they're dirty when we use them. Okay, and so this guide is designed to make you think about how you're using tomatoes, and I think we can universalize that to fresh produce in your production. And the key thing to remember is that production, the washing of your produce, is not designed as a kill step. I'm reasonably confident that there are no validated kill steps out there for fresh, ready-to-eat produce. And instead, the chlorine and the peroxyacetic acid, PAA, that we put in the wash water is designed to minimize cross-contamination as opposed to actually killing any pathogens that might be present on the product itself. Okay, so that has some super big implications for leafy greens production, for any kind of fresh produce. So you guys should be thinking about that when you're washing your produce. What evidence do we have that what you're doing is helpful? Because there are certainly instances where we have been washing produce thinking that it was helpful, and it was not actually helpful. You might have actually increased your risk of cross-contamination. So it's super important to keep that kind of stuff in mind. All right, so that's the stuff about tomatoes. By all means, ping me if you'd like a copy of that report. It's really good. It's really good stuff about good agricultural practices and good harvesting practices and that sort of thing for tomato production. Post-harvest handling is what we're talking about in terms of washing, but it's got stuff about transport and worker hygiene, all that good sort of stuff. Super, super important. Okay, so that's our fresh produce part of our programming today. And then the next thing that I want to talk about is actually something that I've talked about before, but it's come up again. And I want to make some things clear about FDA versus USDA and what kind of all of this stuff means out in the world. Okay, so there are places in food production, there are food manufacturing facilities who do what we call dual jurisdiction. They produce meat and poultry things, they produce fish, and they produce salads, for instance, vegetarian salads. Well, those things are all regulated really, really differently. And I just want to go through again because it's super important when you're setting up your business that you understand this. So I'm going to move this just a little bit closer. I think this should show over here behind me. Okay, so the USDA Food Safety Inspection Service regulates the production of meat and poultry. Okay, FSIS regulates the production of meat and poultry. And FSIS is one of, I think, 26 agencies within the USDA, and they're the ones that all the federal inspectors work for. Okay, if you are in a Talmadge-Aiken state and you are in a Talmadge-Aiken plant, you have state inspectors that are deputized as federal inspectors. So they are acting on behalf of your state, but as a federal inspector. Okay, so that's USDA, and they cover meat and poultry, okay, and catfish. That was the new one last year. And all the things that go into meat and poultry and catfish, okay? So that's USDA. If you have more than 2 or 3%, kind of depending on what you're making, of meat or poultry in your product, it is absolutely USDA product, all right? So the next thing, juice. Juice is covered by the FDA juice HACCP, all right? In juice, we include nut juices, okay? So nut juices, so almond milk or whatever, those are juice, and those, because you have to juice an almond to actually get the milk out of it, and those are covered by FDA HACCP regulations. They may also be covered by other regulations, like the canned food regulation. USDA HACCP has its own set of canned food regulations, and I mean, they all sound exactly alike, and you all have to do the same thing, essentially, but they're just written in different sections of the Code of Federal Regulation. Okay, so that's juice. Fish. The FDA covers all fish species, minus catfish. Anything that's an animal, kingdom Animalia, and comes out of a body of water is covered by the fish HACCP regulation, okay? That includes things like alligators and turtles, okay? That's all fisheries HACCP, okay? You may also have the things, canned food in fisheries HACCP. So if you are making canned tuna fish, you are covered under fisheries HACCP and the canned food regulation, okay? All canned food requires something called a scheduled process. All right, so then the next thing is down at, these are all federal, okay? These are federal HACCP plans. Next, we have food code HACCP. Okay, food code HACCP is at the local level. The food code is something that is written by the Codex Alimentarius, and we rewrite it every, there's this big meeting, and we rewrite it every 2 years, and we try and incorporate new food safety knowledge and move out things that don't make a difference in public health. But the thing to know is that your locality adopts or writes a food code. So the food code where I am here in Maine is not necessarily the same food code in Hudson Valley in New York. Okay, the food code in the Hudson Valley of New York is not necessarily the same food code in Manhattan. All right, this makes, when we have like national Facebook groups where we talk about food safety and talk about food production and things like that, it can be super difficult, because what's legal in my neck of the woods under my food code may not be legal in your neck of the woods under your food code. And one of the best instances of this is what pH is considered acidic enough to not have to worry about botulism. Okay, in New York it's 4.4. In California it's 4.2. Now, I'm here to tell you botulism doesn't act differently in New York than in California. However, their legislatures do. Okay, and so they have, along with their food safety authorities or whatever, adopted a food code that has those two different limits, and adopt regulations that have those two different limits. It is a regulatory burden, not a science burden, because the actual science burden is 4.6. Okay, so that's one example of how the same food code, okay, the same words, food code, can mean two completely different things to different people. Okay, so that's food code HACCP. All right, the next thing that you can hear of is Codex HACCP. All right, remember that Codex Alimentarius that I talked about? Well, there's also a Codex HACCP. It's a non-regulatory HACCP that talks about the 12 steps of HACCP. USDA HACCP is written to a Codex standard. Juice HACCP is written to a Codex standard. Fisheries HACCP is not written to a Codex standard. Okay, so keep that in mind, because when we write fish HACCPs, okay, and we say the word HACCP associated with fish, actually we mean something completely different than what we mean in fish in meat and poultry and juice. Okay, and then finally, because this is happening on Monday, preventive controls. Okay, preventive controls is what's coming to everybody who doesn't make meat and poultry, juice and fish, and isn't retail. Okay, that's coming on Monday. All right, and preventive controls are the FDA equivalent of HACCP. Okay, they hate it when we say that, but that's the easiest way to explain it. So basically, several years ago, 7 now, in January of 2011, a new law was signed in called the Food Safety Modernization Act. There are 7 parts of that law. It has been rolling out ever since 2011, and on Monday, the rollout to small businesses is complete. And you have to have, if you are a small business, you have to have a compliant preventive controls plan, both written and in action at your facility. Okay. Of course, if you need help with that, that's what we're here for. I'm pretty sure if you contact me today, I could probably still get one written between now and then if you don't have a particularly complex plan. All right, feel free to contact us about that. But the thing is that these preventive controls plans, like all the rest of this, there's a set of training that needs to happen. Okay, and writing any of these plans, okay, is dependent upon education and training down here, your good manufacturing practices program, which is also part of FSMA, 21 CFR 117 Part B is good manufacturing practices. That's GMPs for here, okay, and as well as preventive controls, okay, because FDA rewrote all their GMPs. So, and there are lots of new things to think about in the GMPs, like allergen cross contact and all that good sort of stuff. Okay, so we have those GMPs. All right, and then finally, once you understand those, then you can go about and write your HACCP or your preventive controls plan. All right, and the idea behind the preventive controls plan is that we control what we can through process controls, and we prevent what we can't of what we call known and reasonably foreseeable hazards by making sure that they don't happen. So, you know, like sanitation, we prevent listeria by and large anywhere you go by sanitation. We prevent allergen issues by labeling correctly. Those are all examples of preventive controls. If you make something that is covered by preventive controls, you make more than $1 million averaged over the past 3 years with some inflation indexes and things like that. Or you have fewer than 500 people and you're not what we call a qualified facility. So a qualified facility is like a very small facility that doesn't make $1 million a year, that distributes within 275 miles or within the state that they're in. You don't have to write a preventive controls plan. You do, however, have to submit a form to the FDA. It's an affidavit, they call it, saying that you don't have to follow preventive controls. And you have to actually do all the hard work of the preventive controls anyway. You have to prove to them that you are precluding physical, chemical, and microbial hazards from your food. Further, if you are in distribution, the likelihood that your distributor is not going to require you to have a preventive controls plan by Monday is almost non-existent. I've actually not talked to any distributors who are like, oh yeah, they're exempt, they don't have to write a preventive controls plan. Much more frequently, I am talking to distributors who are like, I know they don't need a preventive controls plan because they're under, this actually happened this week, they're under juice HACCP, I want a preventive controls plan anyway. And so, because my client wants to get into distribution, we write a preventive controls plan. Okay, so what that then brings us to is something I call the burden of inspection. When you produce food out there in the universe, anywhere you are really, you probably have some burden of inspection. Okay, the burdens are in order here. The burden of inspection is highest at the USDA. Okay, if you run a slaughter plant, you pretty much always have at least one, if not more, inspectors in your facility. Let's see here. Food code HACCP, you probably see your restaurant inspector fairly frequently. That's a pretty high burden of inspection. And then it drops off pretty dramatically. Fish, if you're making fish, especially if you're not making ready to eat fish, you may not see your FDA inspector for like 3 or 4 years. And even if you do make ready to eat fish and you're doing things correctly, you may not see them but once a year. All right, juice HACCP, you may see them even more infrequently than that. And preventive controls is actually anybody's guess because they really haven't started doing preventive controls inspections. Our guess are people are going to get audited every 3 or 4 years because that's what the FDA tries to go and visit. They try and visit everybody within 3 or 4 years. Okay. And so that regulatory burden is something that you are taking on when you decide to make food for a living, okay? And it's super important when you make that decision that you make that decision, okay? And all the things that come along with it. We are totally here to help across a gamut of services that will make a difference to help carry that burden with you. Okay, we can't carry it for you, but I can carry that burden with you. Okay, and whether I'm doing it or somebody else is doing it, in order to be able to adequately carry that burden of inspection, you have to not only understand technically what you are doing, all right, you have to be able to go out into the marketplace and understand how your inspection process helps you solve market problems, okay? You know, for example, people basically only buy inspected meat, all right? If you're making a business out of it, it's inspection or nothing else, okay? And then then there is the burden of making sure that your employees are empowered to understand what your inspection process is, what your HACCP planning or preventive controls planning means, what their part is in this sequence, and how they're responsible for things within their technical knowledge, the GMPs that they interact with, because they're going to interact with some of them, and then wherever they are in HACCP or preventive controls planning. And then finally, it is super important to understand how your own mind works. The emotional intelligence that you need to be able to cope with your regulatory burden is high, okay? Because especially in a USDA plant, you're dealing with government inspectors who have a completely different set of priorities and goals than you do, okay? Yes, we all are working to protect the public health. We are all working on a lot of the same goals, but not all the same goals, and certainly not all the same methodologies for all those same goals. And it's super important that when you look at your inspectors and you look at what's going on in your plant, that you understand essentially where the inspectors come from and how to organize your mind so that you can deal with whatever the inspector throws at you, okay? And we would love to work with you on this. This is the life coaching that we do, is, you know, helping people create the emotional intelligence so they can go out and execute the things they need to do to run their business. All right, but it takes work. It takes work, and it doesn't solve your inspection problems, really. It solves the problems that come along in your mind that create the overwhelm, that create the misery, all right, that you then kind of throw back out into the universe. All right. I'm inviting you not to be that person. I'm inviting you to take a look at how you interact in the universe and be the person the universe is calling you to be by understanding your own mind and understanding your inspection process and getting everything right over here, all right, so that you can work with your inspectors so that everybody can work towards protecting the public health and making companies grow. I think that there is a super opportunity out there for people to understand and learn this kind of stuff so that we can get more local food out into local markets and build prosperous regional economies based on food. I mean, that's what we're all about here at Dirigo Food Safety. So that's what I got for you today. It's just before the bottom of the hour. I haven't had any questions come in, but that's totally fine. I'll be here again in 2 weeks, and I want everybody to keep an eye out. I actually have a book coming out all about employee empowerment. I'm super excited, and I want everybody to look for that. We're going to have a ton more information. I'm probably going to be presenting on that in 2 weeks. I just have to finish up a couple of things on the book, but we're going to be doing webinars. We're going to have a master class, and it's all leading to something super exciting in January. So thanks so much for attending. Thanks so much for watching or rewatching, depending on what you're doing. And if you have any questions, by all means, send them on over. Thanks so much, and everybody have a great day.